Welcome to the MultiCultural MindSet broadcast. Your host is Dr. Laverne Haynes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the MultiCultural MindSet, where we explore the topics of race, faith, culture, and trauma as related to the mental health of Black Americans. I'm your host, Dr. Laverne Haynes Collins, and today we are talking about holidays, the blues, the battles, and the boundaries. I bet some of you can relate the blues, the battles, and the boundaries of the holiday season. Well, if you've been tuning in weekly, I hope you are growing into that greater cultural sensitivity that I aim to promote. And I hope that you are outgrowing any of the oppressive beliefs that focus on blaming and fixing and labeling as deficits factors that are culturally normative in Black people, or even just in Black life or Black culture. You know that I want to help you grow into a multicultural mindset that makes your counseling a good fit for more members of Black communities. So today, as we talk about holidays, the blues, the battles, and the boundaries. If you can relate, just type in the chat. If you're watching live, especially, just type in, I can relate. Anyway, this is an extremely important topic at this time of year, especially when things come up for historically marginalized populations at the holidays. So I hope you'll stay with us to hear my thoughts on the holiday experiences of blues, battles, and boundaries. So the holiday blues are very frequently, very commonly discussed. The end of the year, Christmas season, for those who celebrate Christmas, is traditionally a time of celebration and all kinds of social events. But it can also cause despair and loneliness, worry, a lot of self-reflection. Feelings of grief may be particularly intense at this time of year, especially if you've lost loved ones who are absent from those annual activities and their loss is very obvious. Now, that's one form of the blues that warrants attention. But this experience already gets a lot of attention. And I think every counselor knows to invite a person to allow their grief to run its course. You know, to allow them to set limits on triggering activities and to practice self-care, to have a support system, to find ways to honor your loved one if you desire, to give yourself the rest that you need, and to limit alcohol, as this can lower your mood, and do the other things that we talk about as being appropriate and necessary for navigating losses due to death or absence when you especially miss that person at the holidays. But there are other reasons why the holidays may not be so happy. And unfortunately, less attention is given to the set of emotions that I believe comes up as a result of relational battles and boundaries. Let me tell you, navigating those factors in many Black American families brings on a whole different level of stress, anxiety, emotions, and sometimes these aspects are more than the holiday blues. These become the holiday battles. And people in your practice community may bring some of those battles into their session for discussion. At other times, they don't bring the battle directly into session for discussion, but you might be able to discern whenever some of these battles we're going to talk about and some of these boundaries that we're going to talk about today are problematic. So today I'm coming with a different take on the battles and some examples that may help you provide some psychoeducation and maybe some deeper introspection for people in your practice community. Let me explain. Today, I'm going to talk about differences in how connectivity is valued within families. And then I'll talk about how racial differences can occur when we talk about boundaries that counselors need to consider. Racial differences in boundaries. Then I'll conclude by just saying a few words about decolonizing boundary norms when you are working with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So first, let me talk about individualist versus collectivist values in the family and how those values and differences in values can influence expectations. So what is an individualist mindset? This is a culture where your lifestyle norms and decisions focus on each person making decisions that benefit them personally. It's a way of making choices that emphasizes individual and personal preferences, where it's about finding your path and doing what's best for you. Finding your path, your path. Do what's right for you. Live your own life. We hear that. We hear that in the United States, all over the place. Because individual rights and opportunities prevail as the foundation of a person's decision making in US culture. Overall, the culture here in the US, very individualistic culture, very highly individualistic. But guess what? In the cultures of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, the grandmas and the grandpas and grandmas and the nanas didn't survive by thinking individualistically. They survived in community with a collectivist mindset. And this goes back to Africa and Asia and Latinx cultures. It goes back to indigenous North American cultures. Collectivism has ruled, not individualism. In fact, individualism was seen as highly disrespectful. So, what exactly is this collectivistic thinking, this mindset, this culture? Collectivistic cultures focus on the impact of how decisions create problems or success for the entire social unit, beginning with the family as the core of society rather than the individual. And this collectivistic thinking is quite common for many people who identify as Black, Indigenous, or persons of color. The very thought of modern individualism in a collectivistic culture and history can stir up fear of loss, loss of life, loss of values, loss of relationships, the loss of security, and even fear of rejection. What you often have is an older generation fearing the loss of future generations, fearing the loss of others whom they care about. Individualistic thinking fears the loss of self. Understanding the roots of the fear, the pain and the hurt is key to preventing battles. Now, one of the therapeutic tasks, and this applies whether you're talking about a traditional collectivistic mindset, say in older people, or an individualistic mindset, sometimes as we hear from younger generations, is to challenge the cognitive distortion of personalization. So when you hear statements like, my mama just wants to control me, and I'm not going to be manipulated by my grandparents, or when you hear others say, I don't know why these young people don't want to be around us no more. You got to put family first. I don't care how grown you get, right? Isn't that what we hear? Yeah, that's what we hear. Each party feels personally offended. The individualists in the family do not understand where the collectivists are coming from. And the collectivists in the family can't figure out why the individualists insist on doing something so different from the family norms. This creates an internal battle and a battle between people, especially at holiday times when there are expectations about family traditions. Where will you spend the holiday? Will you lean into the family tradition or will you lean out? Elders, for instance, who may think collectively, might simply be trying to hold on and stay connected to something precious that they fear losing. And because of the difference in the life season, when you think about Erik Erikson's model, the younger members of the family are into identity formation versus identity repudiation. In other words, determining who I am and who I am not. And generativity is important in Erikson's model for the older generations, where there's a focus on generational connectivity, generational legacy, intergenerational care. For some people who've been raised in a Black American family, it can be a bit of a fight for a person to establish themselves and push for the freedom to choose their ideas, their values, their identity. Some of those people will sit in front of their therapist this season, and the therapist must be prepared. So here's what providers must understand, because of the legacy of racial and historical trauma among Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That many family members are unconsciously afraid that their loved ones would abandon the very beliefs and habits and ways of life that have historically been crucial for survival through the times of slavery and colonization and Jim Crow era thinking and immigration history and these beliefs and habits and ways that have been necessary as family rituals of connection, even family reunions. That can be an important family ritual of connection. Some people may even experience those family members, because these values are so important to them. Other family members may experience this value as being a manipulative or controlling behavior when it's really much more about holding on to legacy, preventing the trauma of loss, and maintaining important rituals of connection. Maybe some members of your practice community who are continuing to battle for that liberation and the ability to live in this world the way they choose to. Maybe they don't want to go to a family reunion because they don't feel connected to a bunch of distant cousins and uncles that maybe drink too much. Well, it's important to help them accept that their family members might be motivated by fear more than a desire to intrude or control. At the same time, they don't need to take on the fear of their elders or their relatives, but their decision to attend can actually be based on whichever set of values they choose to honor, but that requires recognizing that there's a values conflict and not just an attempt to control. They might choose to talk it through with their family or not, but that part's not the counselor's choice to either encourage or not encourage, but to simply help them explore. At the same time, the collectivists in the family may come to you and may need some encouragement to understand the phase of life of individuation that perhaps other or younger generations are navigating. And they too may value from some psychoeducation so that they don't take the choices to spend holidays differently as a sign of rejection of the family or the family values. A clear sense of boundaries helps a person's nervous system feel protected and safe. Most people feel calm and relaxed once they see or feel a boundary that protects them. And the boundary is what gives us our space and gives us a buffer with which to engage the world. But boundaries, especially energy boundaries, are not experienced the same way for BIPOC versus non-BIPOC folks. One of my favorite authors writes about this, Dr. Jennifer Moulin. She wrote the book Decolonizing Therapy. It's a phenomenal book. And one of the sections in her book addresses how energy boundaries are impacted by race. She talks about ways that white supremacy or colonization impacts BIPOC energy boundaries. She suggests that it makes it difficult not to experience, when you're a Black, Indigenous, or person of color, an undue or unnecessary internal and external responsibility for the betterment of everybody in your world, for the betterment of your community and your workplace, and for family members and students. And this is often to the detriment of one's own health. BIPOC people are more inclined to not set boundaries because they feel responsible. And they often absorb the anxiety of other people, especially people of privilege, when there's discord in any environment. BIPOC people will tend to minimize their own needs because it feels that someone else's safety is being threatened. And BIPOC individuals may feel fearful of asking for what they need because they don't want to appear as being too much. So therefore, their energy boundary is weaker and their energy is weaker. But when you talk about non-BIPOC individuals and families, asking for and expecting that exceptions will be made, even if it's to the detriment or the distress of other people, or without even sometimes considering the extent of how it impacts others. There is in non-BIPOC communities not as much of a hesitation in expecting and asking for what they need by way of boundaries. And unconsciously, they can take up more space than they realize in terms of energy, because they have the expectation that others can and should set all types of boundaries with ease. Because it's easy for them, it should be easy for others. The reality is that there are perhaps deeper consequences for BIPOC families and family members whose identities do not benefit from privilege. So think about this. The therapist leads a person into setting boundaries. And you know what? They'll be imposing white expectations upon Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Please don't suggest or lead a person into embracing a set of boundaries or ways of boundary expressions that don't consider the cultural nuances of that individual and their family norms. If boundaries are not easily set in a Black family, stop pathologizing that. Boundaries just don't occur in the same way in Black cultures as they occur in white cultures. So counselors need to think introspectively about what norms and what standards they are applying or imposing. As a provider, are you unconsciously maybe judging someone else's boundaries by not allowing for cultural differences in how and when and with whom those boundaries are set? If so, take a look at that. Now, we don't want anyone to be stifled by their family members' unconscious and maybe deeply ingrained worries and fears. BIPOC community members should feel empowered to make choices, to pick which holidays they want to celebrate and which events they want to attend. And they need not feel obligated to explain those decisions or seek approval from others unless they want to, or unless they feel that those explanations are part of their family culture and they want to honor that culture. Everyone's culture and personal choices are valid, and everyone is worthy of the freedom to celebrate in the way that means the most to them. But help every individual to make those considerations within their own family norms and not your own norms if they are different. Boundary setting in Black families, in Brown families, is different than cultures and families with a Eurocentric background. So, 3 concepts in review. What are they? For the holidays, and actually for the holidays and all year long, for BIPOC family dynamics. 1, remember that different generations have different fears through the lens of individualist and collectivist values. Fears of losing self for individualists and fears of losing others for collectivists. Number 2, boundary setting has historically been different for BIPOC and non-BIPOC families. Don't impose non-BIPOC boundary values on BIPOC families. And then remember that creating a safe space for clients means validating their whole selves, including their culture and their racial identities. So thank you for tuning into today's episode on boundaries, battles, blues at the holiday time. And if you work as a mental health professional, I hope this episode encourages you to look deeper into your practice, to challenge and change assumptions that you make. I hope that this helps you to decolonize your practice as you remove non-BIPOC boundary expectations in families from your strategies and approaches. Let's continue this journey toward cultural competency together. Remember, I always say one step at a time. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, like it, love it, whatever you're allowed to do on the platform that you're watching it, and share it with others who might benefit. This is Laverne Haynes Collins signing off, and until next time, keep practicing with empathy, humility, and cultural sensitivity. This is your multicultural mindset. See you next time. Hello, I'm Dr. Laverne Collins, and I want to invite you to be a part of something that is going to transform your practice. Here's the deal. For years, counselors have asked me if I provide consultation services on topics related to mental health and racial disparities and effectiveness in multicultural counseling. I've been providing trainings on these topics for the last 20 years, and I always get that request for consultation services. Well, I'm now offering a monthly consultation group on the topics that you bring to me. That's right. Every month, you can bring your racial diversity and counselor sensitivity questions to me, and I will share my insights. And this is available at a phenomenal group rate. Now, here's why you need this. We are living in a time where it is imperative that our helping presence is culturally responsive and culturally responsible in service to our practice communities. However, Many counselors did not get very much education on really working effectively with Black, Indigenous, and people of color in graduate school. And many people have struggled to keep up with the current findings and the best practices for serving racially identified populations. So I've developed this monthly counseling group that meets on the first Friday of every month from 8:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And it's simply called Office Hours with Dr. Collins. And when you join this, I'm going to work with you in this consultation group to answer the questions that just come up in day-to-day practice, questions that come up for you and other providers, questions that you bring me about issues of race, faith, culture, and trauma. Now, this is a safe space where you can bring all the questions other folks don't talk about. You know what I'm talking about, the unaskable questions. For me, there is really no such thing as an unaskable question. And if you've participated in any of my webinars before, you know I go into great detail and deep content. So again, you can bring your own questions and learn from other people's questions. Your questions, my insight, and my 30 years of expertise on these topics. You'll have a full 90 minutes of my time every month for such a low price that you really cannot pass it up. So continue reading on this page. Get in on this now, too, because slots are limited and they'll go fast. And I'll see you during my office hours. Bye for now.